Carbon leakage occurs when a country outsources the manufacturing of goods to another country that has less strict greenhouse gas regulations. One of the most prominent examples of carbon leakage can be seen in the relationships between the United States and other developing countries such as China. In 2011, the United States outsourced about 11% of its total consumption-based emissions to the developing world. Most of this outsourcing involved the manufacturing of goods and services. In China, nearly 25% of the carbon dioxide emissions that are produced are ultimately exported to the developed countries. Carbon leakage has both environmental and economic implications for countries. In 2015, the Center for Global Development stated that developing countries are responsible for 63% of the current carbon emissions. Currently, developed countries consume more than they actually produce in their own countries. The result of this is a massive carbon emissions growth in the developing countries. As the demand for consumption increases, other countries must keep up with the demands and increase their production and essentially their emissions. This has led many environmental groups to advocate for policies that are based on an environmental footprint. An environmental footprint would take into account a country's impact on the environment in regards to the role of their consumption and international trade, not just what they are emitting in their own country.
The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency used to have up-to-date information regarding national climate change research and policy, but early in the Trump administration this information was taken down. The current EPA site's lack of information shows that climate change is of low concern and low priority in this country. Trump has signed an executive order that overturns some of the stricter emissions regulations put in place by the Obama administration. Trump's environmental policies have a focus on energy independence over lower emissions. This lowers our dependence on other countries and therefore our demands on countries with fewer regulations. However, Trump has also issued an executive order and plans for further deregulation. This means that there would be less carbon leakage under his policies, but our emissions would continue to affect other countries, including those most at risk. One might argue that if we reach energy independence and continue on the path of decreasing regulation, our emissions could decrease if there's an increased demand for it. However, over the last 15 years, climate change has become an increasingly polarized issue, one that is either vehemently accepted or denied among party lines. In the future, societal shifts may happen, as recent studies show that over 80% of people show concern about climate change, but both Democrats and Republicans have higher priorities, like the economy. With research being hidden or misrepresented, a societal shift of greater awareness and care for environmental issues is unlikely anytime soon.
Globally, leaders have brainstormed solutions to combat climate change. As a result, we have the Paris Agreement, which took the place of the Kyoto Protocol in 2015. The Paris Agreement is an international treaty aiming to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by adjusting financial and economic factors, with an understanding that climate change is a human-made and is mostly due to the excessive emission of CO2. In 2015, USA and China pledged to contribute to the Paris Agreement, creating new hope for the future climate. Both parties agreed to limit emissions by 2 degrees, thus creating an opportunity to improve China and USA relations. But under the Trump administration, many officials are nervous that Trump will remove America's role in this treaty, with statements referring to global warming as a hoax, dramatically cutting funding of American policies, and recently signing executive orders putting industrial jobs such as coal mining before the environment. Who is to say that they are wrong? If it were to happen and the future pans out like it is being written, the climate temperature will increase easier due to an increase in CO2 emissions, potentially making the USA the #1 contributor to CO2 emissions instead of China.
Since Trump's policies aim to decrease this concept of carbon leakage, we can't ignore the fact that global warming is happening and the relevancy of its effects. A warming northwest will cause earlier snowmelt that will decline the natural water storage during the warm season and result in more flooding during the winter. A warming northwest will increase insect outbreaks, and especially pine beetle attacks on trees. Their prolonged invasions will weaken trees and increase the likelihood of wildfires. A warming northwest will put stress on cold water species like salmon. High winter flow will flood out eggs, a warmer ocean will make them more susceptible to diseases, and shifts in migration will disrupt the lucrative salmon industry. A warming northwest will cause sea level rise due to thermal expansion. We are likely to see erosion, land loss, and a stronger storm surge. Towns must relocate to higher ground to survive. Warming in the islands and on the coast will see ocean acidification. Bleaching corals will have limited recoveries, tuna supply will decrease as they shift eastward. Warming in the islands and on the coast will result in a decrease in fresh water supplies. The Caribbean is projected to have less rainfall and tropical storms to replenish the supplies. The Pacific is projected to see increased heavy downpours and rainfall that will result in more floods and drinking water contamination. Warming in the islands and on the coast increases the intensity of hurricanes or typhoons, with warmer ocean temperatures. Property damage will be evident, especially with a rising sea level that will decrease the frequency of storm surges.
Climate change effects on individual regions will vary, but those living in the poorest countries will often suffer the most, even though they emit the least carbon emissions. The term forest riders is used to describe countries like Kiribati that produce very little emissions but could be wiped off the earth because of rising sea levels resulting from global warming. A few examples of affected areas include Bangladesh, where increasingly frequent floods will wipe out crops, Sudan, where the Sahara Desert is expanding, which will lead to less cropland and less food, the Caribbean, which will experience more hurricanes, Siberia, where the permafrost is melting and Arctic ice are subsiding, Tuvalu, which could eventually be wiped out by the rising sea level, the Great Barrier Reef, which will experience bleaching of coral reefs, disrupting the ecosystems in the ocean, and the Alps, where global warming will disrupt snowfall and will dramatically alter the environment there.
You might come across a climate denier who acts like they're doing the whisper challenge.
And that's why we need to pay attention to these future effects.
And global warming is a hoax? But don't back down. Be resilient.
We can't keep the relevancy of carbon leakage and global warming a whisper. Cut that mentality.